You're closer than you think to mastering your energy. But beware, what if the power to control energy isn't something you have to earn, because it's already flowing through you right now? In this video, we uncover the forgotten teachings of Franz Anton Mesmer, the man who first mapped the invisible force running through your body, mind, and the world around you. He called it the universal magnetic fluid, not a metaphor, not a symbol, a real substance, as real to him as the pull of the moon or the weight of air on your skin. He believed this fluid was the hidden medium behind every movement, every emotion, every breath, a living current flowing through everything: stars, soil, muscle, memory. In his 1770 Neen memoir, Mesmer described it as a force capable of propagating and communicating all impressions of movement. That phrase sounds simple, almost mechanical, but to Mesmer, it was sacred. It meant that behind every visible action, there was an invisible wave. Every ripple on water, every shiver in the spine, every thought that arrives before you understand it, carried, conducted, transferred by this fluid. He didn't see this as mystical. He saw it as law, not the law of man, but of nature. This magnetic fluid, he said, does not stop at skin. It flows through all matter, animate and inanimate, through the bark of trees, through the crust of the earth, through the blood in your veins, through the silence between stars. A single continuous field, a pulse, soft and ceaseless, weaving everything into one body. You've probably felt it, that moment in a forest when the air thickens with meaning, that sense that the moon isn't just beautiful, it's doing something. The way your hands sometimes hum when you're holding emotion, you weren't imagining it. To Mesmer, these were not metaphors, they were physics. He called the interaction between living beings and this force animal magnetism. Not animal as in wild or instinctual, but as in living, breathing. A magnetic relationship between life and the cosmos. Not belief, but transfer. Not worship, but contact. He saw it working like this. Every being is both receiving and sending energy, like tuning forks that vibrate in response to each other. If one is dissonant, the others feel it. If one is strong, it can restore the weaker ones to harmony. A process not of words, but of resonance. And the universe, he imagined it as an immense electrical machine, a system of interlinked harmonics, celestial bodies acting like conductors, sending down waves of alignment or disruption depending on their position. The stars weren't just lights overhead, they were part of the circuit. Try to feel what that means. Everything from the arc of a planet to the tremble in your fingertips, playing its part in a universal composition. He compared it to an orchestra. Every body, every rock, every wind pattern, an instrument, some in tune, some not, but always playing, always moving, always connected by this fluid. He spoke of it as a universally distributed and continuous fluid, and he meant it quite literally, as if nerves were wires, trees were antennae, and the sky itself was humming with charge. This wasn't an invention, it was a reawakening. Mesmer wasn't the first to speak of this field. He was remembering, too, echoing something that had been said again and again in different languages, under different names. In China, they called it Qi, a life force that travels through channels in the body called meridians. When blocked, illness follows. When flowing, life returns. In India, it was prana, not just breath, but the force behind breath, the spiral that moves through the chakras, nourishing the mind, lighting the fire of clarity. In the West, long before Mesmer, philosophers spoke of the ether, the subtle substance of the heavens, the invisible bridge between the divine and the physical. Mesmer's fluid wasn't separate from these ideas. It was their European mirror, their mechanical echo. He once described the nervous system as carrying an internal ether, a delicate conductor of this force, an inner river where spirit meets sensation. Even now, modern thinkers use terms like the biofield. They talk of coherence, of frequency, of electromagnetic signatures. And though the language has shifted, the intuition remains. What he called fluid, others call chi, or prana, or aether, or vibration, or field. But it's the same thing. You felt it when someone walked into a room and changed it. You've sensed it between your hands when you're holding silence. You've known it, even if no one ever taught you its name. Mesmer believed the body was not separate from the sky. In his earliest writings, he drew directly from Newton. He saw how the moon could pull the sea and asked, what then does it pull in us? He believed planetary motion stirred our inner tides, that the stars didn't just shine, they stirred, moved, whispered, and that we, without knowing, responded. Try this. Imagine your body as an antenna, thin, sensitive, always tuning. The right alignment of thought, posture, planetary rhythm lets the vital currents flow freely. The wrong alignment brings stillness, blockage, dis-ease. He saw energy maps layered over the body, not drawn in ink, but felt like warm rivers beneath skin. Some of his students tried to capture them, drawing crude diagrams of flows radiating from the forehead, the chest, the palms. They watched how energy seemed to follow intention, how a gesture could redirect it, how a glance could spark it. Sometimes the current passed through his hands, sometimes through a strange device, his baquet, filled with water and metal, believed to store and transmit magnetic force. But the source wasn't the tool, it was always the field. To Mesmer, this world was not a tangle of dead matter, it was a living web, a system of pulses and waves, more like breath than machine. Nature, body, sky, all strung along the same thread. And when that thread is clear and taut, things feel right. You know this, you've lived it. But what happens when it tangles? When that flow is blocked, or broken, or pulled too tight? That's where we go next. But first, feel how old this knowing is. Not Mesmer's alone. He was one voice in a long chain of remembering. This current, this living force, has been spoken of under different names, by different mouths, in different lands. And yet, the experience it points to is the same. In the mountains of China, they called it qi, not as a concept, but as breath itself. Not just the air, but the charge behind it. Qi moves through hidden rivers in the body meridians. And when those rivers run clear, we feel alive, clear-minded, grounded. But when they clot, when they still, when they surge too wildly, something inside us suffers. Not just the body, the spirit, the clarity, the rhythm of our emotions. You've known this, the ache that doesn't show on scans, the tension that no stretch can release. That's qi asking to move. In the Indian traditions, it is prana, carried not just in breath, but by breath, spiraling through the nadis channels, finer than blood, and weaving through centers of perception called chakras. Prana isn't energy in the way we think of fuel. It's vitality, life in motion, the thing that lets you feel wonder or fear or awe. When it knots, the emotion knots with it. And farther west, through hermetic threads and Renaissance whispers, they called it aether, the fifth element, the invisible bridge between the heavenly and the human. a subtle body mirroring the stars. They believed that man contained the image of the cosmos, not metaphorically, but as structure. That your flesh holds echoes of Saturn, of Venus, of the sun, not symbolically, physically. And Mesmer, he stood here, in the middle of it all. In one hand, the inheritance of reason. He'd studied Newton, gravity, medicine. In the other, a listening heart, tuned to something deeper. He described the nervous system as carrying an internal ether. And when you hear that, remember what it means. That within you, right now, there is a current moving. Not just signals, but sensation. Not just sensation, but meaning. Today, some call it the biofield. Not to replace the older names, but to trace the thread into our time. Scientists speak of electromagnetic fields, of coherence, of cells syncing up like flocks of birds. They map the energy of organs. They track the frequencies of healing. But the pulse they're naming is ancient, different tongue, same heartbeat. So what is it? It is not chi, or prana, or ether, or fluid. It is what all of them reach toward. The thing beneath the name, the pattern under the skin, a unity. And for Mesmer, that unity didn't end at your body. It extended outward into the sky. In his earliest writings, he reached toward the stars, not as symbols, but as forces. His doctoral thesis explored the influence of planetary motion on human tissue. Think about that. He believed that just as the moon moves oceans, the heavens move us. Try it. Imagine your body as tide water, the stars as gravitational fingers, every shift above a tug within. He believed the planets didn't just mark time, they made tides, emotional tides, energetic tides, tides of clarity and confusion, of wellness and imbalance. You weren't wrong to feel strange on certain days. The currents was shifting. When the body is aligned with itself, with its breath, with the rhythms above the energy flows. When misaligned, it stalls, pools, or leaks. Mesmer mapped this, not with scalpels, but with sensation. He believed there were lines of energy running through the body channels that governed the flow of life force. His students tried to draw them. Crude diagrams, yes, but honest. They noticed how energy often moved out through the hands, or gathered behind the eyes, or spun from the chest. Some traced these lines back to his baquet, a circular device of water and metal he used to conduct and amplify the magnetic force. And it worked, not because of belief, but because of alignment, resonance, like an instrument being brought into tune. He saw the body not as a machine to be repaired, but as an antenna, a vessel built to receive, to transmit, to harmonize with the world around it. You felt this when a certain breeze seems to speak to you, when a dream comes on, a night full of stars, when you enter a place and feel something shift in your skin before a word is said. This is not suggestion, it is contact. We don't live in a world of still objects. We live in a world of pulsing threads. Everything touches, everything moves, everything speaks, if you're quiet enough to listen. This was Mesmer's knowing, not of static parts, but of flowing patterns. Nature, body, sky braided together by a single current, a magnetic pulse that binds all things into one breath. But when that breath is interrupted, when the field becomes fractured, when the harmony breaks, Mesmer believed that illness begins long before the body shows it. He believed it begins when the current stops flowing cleanly, when something in the deep channels of your being twists, tightens, swells, or splits. He didn't see sickness as a mistake of flesh, but as a signal, a message from energy itself, saying, something has stopped moving. He called health the free flow of the process of life through thousands of channels in our bodies, and disease, a blockage, a break in the motion, a misdirection in the current, not random, not meaningless, a kind of internal jam. Try this. Picture the body as a river. When water runs smooth, the banks are nourished, the fish thrive, the roots drink. But when something falls in, when a log lodges sideways, or the bank's collapse, flow is disrupted, pressure builds upstream, downstream dries. Pockets of stagnation appear. Some areas flood, others choke. This is how Mesmer saw illness, as the moment when the river inside you, this current of subtle magnetic life, can no longer find its way. His work then was not to cure in the way we think of it now. He wasn't fighting symptoms. He was listening for where the energy had gone wrong and helping it find its way back. His healing was a kind of unkinking, a removal of the unseen obstruction, sometimes gently, sometimes like a storm. And when the dam broke, when that stagnant pressure gave way, something happened. People didn't always get better quietly. Sometimes their bodies reacted like lightning had struck. There were convulsions, deep sobbing, sudden hiccups, fainting spells, breathing that changed rhythm without warning. These were not signs of distress to Mesmer. They were signs of life re-entering. He called it the crisis. You can think of it like a thunderclap, a sudden, violent release. Not because the energy was cruel, but because it had waited too long to move. Observers wrote of rooms full of patients, writhing, moaning, crying, trembling, sometimes at the exact same moment. No words passed between them. No cue was given. Just a shared field and a shared rupture. To outsiders, it looked like chaos. But to those inside it, to those who had been numb for months, or sick for years, or silenced by pain, it felt like something lifting, as if the body had remembered how to shake itself awake. The stuckness didn't just disappear, it released. This was not seen as a setback. It was the beginning of return, a reset, a rearrangement, a way for the magnetic fluid to flood through again, cleansing what had been closed, washing out the held breath, the stored fear, the weight that had no name. To Mesmer, these crises were not accidents. They were part of the medicine, not always gentle, but real. And once it passed, once the shaking stopped, once the tears slowed, once the breath steadied, there was often light behind the eyes again, warmth in the hands, vision where there had been blindness, calm where there had been noise. It didn't always look like healing, but it was. This is what happens when the flow is interrupted long enough. Eventually, it forces its way through. The energy will always try to move again. It's what it does. But when it's blocked for too long, when you're carrying too much or holding too tight, sometimes it needs help remembering how. That's what Mesmer offered, a way back into flow. And when that flow came back, when it began to stir or sputter or find its rhythm again, it didn't always fix what we expect, not right away. It didn't erase the pain like a spell, but it changed the current beneath it. He began to see patterns, not just in the crises, but in the symptoms themselves, signs that meant something deeper than they appeared. Anxiety wasn't just mental unrest. It was energy caught in the chest, either spinning too fast or refusing to move at all. You felt this, the tightening that doesn't come from fear, but makes fear, the invisible pressure rising with no clear source. That's stagnation, like chi stopped in its tracks. Panic, when it bursts, was sometimes just that energy trying to move again, too fast, too hot, too much. Fatigue, too, was not weakness, not a lack of will, Mesmer saw it as flow misaligned, like a river diverted the wrong way. You try to act, but the current isn't with you. The spark doesn't rise. You rest, but don't recover. That's not laziness. That's misdirection in the current. Depression, the heaviness in the heart, the fog behind the eyes, was seen as a dimming. The magnetic flow around the chest, the solar plexus, the seat of your will and your warmth, dulled, thickened, like someone turned the voltage down. And then there's the pain we carry in the shoulders, the neck, the back. That wasn't imagined. It was magnetism. Once fluid settling into matter, sticking to tissue. The way tension nests, the way sorrow stores itself in the spine. This was not abstract to Mesmer. It was deeply real. He saw grief, trauma, fear not as ideas or moods, but as energetic knots. Places where the fluid wound itself too tightly. Healing wasn't about ignoring those places. It was about loosening them. And the loosening didn't come from words alone. He used the body, the breath, the hands, slow, deliberate movements above the skin, his magnetic passes to guide the current, sometimes just inches above the body, like stirring a field without touching it. And the field responded. He used sound too. Music played in soft, steady rhythms, environments that hushed the noise of the outer world so the inner one could speak again. He wasn't working only on muscles. He was working on charge. And in those sessions, things happened that medicine couldn't explain. There was Maria Teresa Paradis, a pianist, a child prodigy, blind since early childhood. But in Mesmer's presence, when he worked, not on her eyes, but her field, her vision returned, not always, not predictably, but when he was near, she saw, as if his magnetic field rekindled something in her that had never truly gone out. And another case, an aristocratic woman, paralyzed in her legs, carried in, laid on the floor, treated with nothing invasive, just hands, intention, presence. And then it began. Convulsions, shaking, a body flooded with release. And when it passed, she stood. To Mesmer, these weren't miracles. They were releases. The energy hadn't been gone. It had been jammed. You can think of it like a garden hose. Kink the hose, and the flow weakens. The spray falters. The pressure builds behind the blockage. You don't need a new hose. You need to unkink it. Or picture an electrical wire. If the circuit shorts, the light dims. Not because the light is broken, but because the path is. Mesmer acted like a human conductor, realigning the flow, re-establishing the charge. But he didn't do it alone. The space did part of the work. The quiet, the atmosphere, the permission. Healing happened in the body, but it also happened around the body, in the field. And this idea that blocked energy causes illness, and that restoration means return to flow, has never left us. You'll hear it today in traditional Chinese medicine, in somatic therapy, in hands-on healing. Different terms, same current. Mesmer just gave it a new frame. He taught that when energy is trapped, the body cries out. But when it moves again, when it is seen, stirred, released, something inside begins to rise. Vitality, clarity, return. And he began to understand something deeper still, that this energy didn't only move by nature. It could be guided, not by tools, but by the human will itself. That was the moment everything changed. In 1774, Mesmer sat beside a patient. His hands were poised to perform the movements he had learned, the sweeps, the gestures, the techniques that by then had become familiar. But something stopped him, not outside, inside, a stillness, a focus. a narrowing of everything in him into a single living point of intent. And the patient responded before his hands moved. Something in that stillness had reached across the space. Something in his attention alone had stirred the energy. That was his revelation, that the current did not only follow the hand, it followed the will. He began to see it clearly. It wasn't just what you did, it was how you were. The magnetizer's internal state shaped the field, the body, the posture, the gaze. These were not the cause. They were the extension. The source was within. He said it like this: the will shapes the field of the room. So he began to practice differently, more like ritual than routine. Feet grounded, legs braced to the body of the one receiving, a closed circuit. Thumbs pressed together, not for balance, but to focus the inner current, to gather it before release. And then the gaze, direct, unwavering, not as confrontation, but as contact, a line drawn from soul to soul. And then came the movements, the passes. His hands swept slowly along the limbs, just above the skin, never rushed. Each motion carried not only form, but force. The gestures did not mimic energy, they moved it. The hand was the arrow, the will was the bow. He wasn't performing, he was projecting. Witnesses described scenes that felt impossible. A patient would begin to weep, not after words, but after a look. Another would collapse into trembling before a hand ever reached them. Sometimes Mesmer wouldn't even rise from his chair, and still the field around him would shift. People sobbed, laughed, cried out, fell silent. Some felt warmth roll through their limbs. Others felt their breath fall into rhythm, all from a presence, a thought held with clarity. He spoke of non-contact influence, the idea that you could transmit the fluid not just with the body, but with the mind, with the eye, with the quiet certainty of focus. He became, in his own words, a living magnet, not metaphorically, literally. The fluid inside him, he believed, could be directed outward into another. And for him, the tools were already built into every human being. The gaze, the breath, the calm, the charged stillness of intent. This was not performance, not suggestion, not persuasion. It was the will as substance, the will as current. Mesmer believed that intention, when pure, when focused, when calm, was not an idea. It was a force. He saw the room itself respond. He saw a human being through silence, breath, and gaze become the center of a field strong enough to stir another soul's alignment. The magnetism didn't come from outside. It came from within, and it could be felt without ever being touched. Sometimes by one person, sometimes by many. There were moments documented, witnessed, sworn to when Mesmer entered a room, and the room itself changed, not from words, not from drama, just from presence. People would begin to tremble, sigh, cry, laugh. Some collapsed softly into sleep. Others broke open in sobs they hadn't known they were holding. No hands had moved. No rituals had begun. Only the field, alive, charged, undeniable, pressing in from the edges. They called it contagious magnetism, and they weren't wrong. Because when a single will becomes that focused, that calm, that aligned, it doesn't stay contained. It expands. It tunes the space around it. It gathers the loose threads of the room and braids them into one pulse. And that pulse moves through the nervous systems of others. It doesn't need permission. It only needs resonance. You felt this in the presence of someone who changed how the air moved. In a crowd where emotion rose like a tide and swept you with it, in silence that didn't feel empty but charged, as if every breath was listening. This is how Mesmer worked, not only with individuals, but with groups. He could stand before 20, 30, 50 people, and one by one, or all at once, the current would begin to stir. Eyes would glaze, limbs would twitch, mouths would open, not for words, but for release. And as this happened more, voices rose to challenge it. They said, it's all in their heads. They called it suggestion, delusion, theater, and even in their disbelief, they noticed something strange. The effects were still real. People fainted, people recovered, pain lifted, sleep deepened, emotions released. Even the critics had to admit imagination alone seemed enough to spark the change, to which Mesmer answered quietly, yes, because the imagination, he believed, was not fantasy. It was magnetism in thought form, a mental force, a shaping agent, not symbolic, but electric. He said, the mind is not watching the energy. The mind is the energy. It directs it, bends it, sends it outward like light through a lens. And in that belief, he was far ahead of his time, because what Mesmer called magnetism, later thinkers would begin to name again. James Braid, a Scottish surgeon, watched the same reactions and gave them a new name, hypnosis. He removed the fluid, stripped away the metaphysics, but kept the method, the gaze, the stillness, the focus. They worked, and even now, there are those who use hands without touch, eyes without words, presence without pressure, practitioners who slow the air around you until something inside starts to listen again. They don't always call it mesmerism, but it echoes him. They guide energy with breath, with steadiness, with faith that the field between bodies can speak without voice. And when belief enters that space, real belief, not hope dressed up as logic, something happens. Because belief is not passive. Belief aligns. It tunes the instrument. It opens the current. It allows flow. Not because the healer is divine, but because the patient remembers how to feel, how to soften, how to receive. Some compare this to placebo, but Mesmer would say, no, placebo is the surface name. The mechanism is deeper. The belief doesn't mimic the healing. The belief is the healing. It sets the inner field to match the outer one. It completes the circuit. The will of the healer, the belief of the healed. Two forces meeting in the magnetic space between. And there are echoes of this even in science now. Studies, quiet ones, often overlooked, show changes in heartbeat, in blood pressure, in pain response, when someone prays from afar, when someone holds intention miles away and means it. We don't fully understand how, but the shift is there, and maybe that's enough, because Mesmer never claimed to explain it all. He only said, this is how it moves. The will is a real force, like wind, like gravity, like fire. And when it is focused through the eye, the hand, the breath, it can rearrange the inner weather of another human being. Storm into calm, confusion into coherence, stillness where before there was noise. And the most important thing Mesmer came to understand was that this force was not his alone. It lives, often forgotten, but always ready in you. Mesmer believed this with the calm certainty of someone who didn't need to be believed, because he'd seen it again and again, not in theory, but in people, in their bodies, their breath, the way their fields lit up when they remembered. He said, we are all born magnetizers, that we each carry within us a current of magnetic fluid. Some more, some less, some brighter, some buried, but always there, always moving. And the difference, he said, wasn't talent. It was sensitivity, not as fragility, but as perception. The ability to feel what others ignore. You've likely felt it too. You turned before the footsteps landed. You picked up your phone, already knowing whose name would glow on the screen. You felt a shift the moment someone walked into the room before they even spoke. That wasn't your imagination. That was your field brushing against theirs. That was your body listening. To Mesmer, those moments were not oddities. They were proof. Proof that the energy around us is not silent. It touches, it speaks, it moves through the spaces between skin and sound. And we feel it when we're still enough, soft enough, clear enough to notice. He called it a kind of empathy of the fluid, a real energetic overlap. When you sense someone's joy before they smile, when their sadness enters your chest before they've named it, that is your field receiving theirs. The words we reach for vibes, energy, a heaviness in the air, they are the modern remnants of something we once understood without explanation. Once we felt through the body. Now we think through the noise, and the noise has grown loud. Modern life doesn't train us to feel. It trains us to override. The constant hum of screens, the pressure to explain what needs to be sensed, the pull toward logic, away from instinct, the disconnection from the earth, from silence, from our own rhythms. And so the sensitivity dulls. But Mesmer never saw this capacity as mystical. He saw it as bodily, as natural as breathing, as present as hunger. He believed your nerves are tuned to feel energy the way your lungs are tuned to draw in air. It is not extra, it is designed. And though the world may tell you otherwise, this knowing still lives under your skin. It shows itself in the mother who calms her child without a word, in the friend who feels your sorrow before you speak it, in the stranger whose glance lingers just long enough to shift something in your spine. You didn't lose the gift. You stopped trusting the signals, but they never stop coming. Try this just once today. Pause before reacting. Feel the moment between the moment. Notice what your body is saying before your mind explains it away. That small shiver, that slight warmth in your palms, that soft lift in your chest when someone walks near, that's the current stirring. You've always had it, and Mesmer believed you could remember. Not through belief alone, through practice, through quiet, through the return to things so simple, so close. You've passed them by 100 times without noticing they were keys. He wrote of it fragments tucked into the lesser read pages of what he called the fourth book of philosophy. Not rules, not doctrine, reminders, ways to wake the current gently, without force. Try this, he said. Stand barefoot on the earth before the sun has fully risen. Not for the ritual, for the rhythm. Let your souls touch the ground before the world has begun speaking too loudly. Feel how the dew cools your skin, how the earth hums. That hum is not imagined, it's resonance. Each morning, let your hands hover just above your body, not touching, just gliding. From forehead to chest, down the arms, over the belly, to the knees, slowly. This is a self-pass, not performance realignment. You're brushing your own field back into flow, not forcing, guiding. Breathe in time with the light. On new moons, slow and deep. On full moons, wide and expansive. On bright mornings, hold your breath just after inhale. Feel how it sharpens. On grey days, exhale. Longer, feel how it softens. The fluid inside you listens. It moves with rhythm, not speed. Eat food that still remembers sunlight, fruit that grew under sky, water that's been allowed to rest, movement that feels like music, not punishment. None of this is mystical. It's energetic clarity. It's hygiene, not of body, of field. These were not superstitions to Mesmer. They were repairs, simple ways to remind the nervous system what it already knows. And if you doubt it, look again at your own life. The mother who softens her child with a glance that's magnetic transmission. The warmth that stays on your chest after a real hug, that's the field lingering, still touching, even after the body's part. The shiver that rises from your spine when a line of poetry lands in the exact place you needed it. That's resonance. The strange relief of sitting under a tree with no words and finally remembering how to breathe. That's contact. Nature magnetizing you back into yourself. Even a handshake, a smile, a hand on the back at just the right moment. Each one a small opening where energy passes, where your field and theirs speak without needing permission. And yet, Mesmer lamented that the modern world had begun to mock these things, to call them childish, coincidental, sentimental. But he knew better. He called them proof. Proof that the energetic self is still alive, still reaching, still speaking, even if the mind has stopped listening. He saw sensitivity not as fragility, but as skill, a birthright, the original language of life. So if you've ever been told you feel too much, what they meant is you're still tuned. You haven't gone numb. You haven't forgotten entirely. And all that's needed to return is this. Notice, trust, begin again. Stand barefoot, close your eyes, run your palms above your skin. Let your breath slow to match something older than words. Feel the current. You've been a magnetizer all along. You just forgot how to feel it. But step into the space he made, and you might remember. The room was dim, like dusk, preserved in velvet. Drapes drawn heavy to hush the daylight. Shadows softened the corners. Everything glowed in quiet. Mirrors lined the walls wide, polished, cold with memory, not for vanity, for reflection. They were placed to catch the invisible, to echo the magnetic fluid as it moved through the space. Mesmer believed that energy multiplied in light, especially when shaped by silver and stillness. Smoke curled in spirals from low braziers, frankincense or lavender or whatever scent opened the breath that day. Not overpowering, just enough to stir the air, to carry the room into another rhythm. And from somewhere, the sound of the glass harmonica, not loud, not sharp, a high, slow shimmer, like water, made music, played live, always so the vibration could enter the body before the mind caught it.